We voted this year in our general election. And we had a vote because we live in a democracy, an institution 2,500 years old. And it's the worst form of government, except for all the others. And we voted because we care. Because in the words of Edmund Burke, the philosopher, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. And when we vote in governments with awesome powers over our lives. They pass laws which bind us, they levy taxes which we must pay, and we grant them control over fully 1/3 of our economy. Because in a democracy, the biggest business in town is government. But it's not that 1/3 of the economy I'm interested in. I'm fascinated by the other 2/3, because that is governed by another institution in which we also have a vote. Here is its story and why it really matters. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company was formed, the world's first ever company. And the purpose was to send ships out into the known and unknown world in pursuit of spices. And these voyages were expensive and risky. And so in order to share in the expense and the rewards, ordinary citizens were invited to invest. And so in the company of others, you would invest and hold a certificate entitling you to a share of the profits of the ship. You were a shareholder. And in fact, in this case, you really were a shareholder because your share of the profits were in the hold of the ship. And so began the modern company, and what a phenomenal success it has been. Because think about what the modern company does 400 years later in our lives. It feeds us, it clothes us, it transports us, and it entertains us. And the decisions of the biggest, most significant companies are surely as important as those of governments themselves. Because when Shell and BP and Exxon decide to take a stand on global warming, their decisions will matter as much as most governments. And when Amazon decides to enter a new country, the whole market changes. And when Apple and Tesla innovate, the world holds its breath. So here's what I don't understand. If these companies are so important to our daily lives, if their decisions are so vital, if they are so powerful, why is news, business news, at the back of the paper and this stuff at the front? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Well, on one level, we know why that's the case. This is entertaining. This is fun. I know it is because I can see you looking at it. You can't take your eyes off it, can you? By contrast, business is just boring. Dry, complicated language. But there is one thing that unites the personalities and the politicians and businesses. That is that we don't feel like we're in control. We have no control. It's amusing. So this gets to be the caffeine of our daily life, while business gets to be the sleeping pill. But in no circumstances do we feel as if we have control. But I think times are changing. I think we are about to enter a whole new world where we feel as if we have a lot of control and a lot of influence via the companies we invest in. I think the times are changing. And the reason I think that is because nothing is as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And what is that idea? Well, pardon the boring business slide, but it's KiwiSaver. This is what's happening in New Zealand, and it's happening all over the world with 401ks, pensions, superannuation schemes. We, the citizens, are investing more and more in the countries we live in and the companies we do business with. This is the KiwiSaver chart. In 10 years, 2.8 million New Zealanders have joined up. It's the most popular financial product since the checkbook. And collectively, we have $43 billion invested in companies now. And by 2030, that will be $200 billion, $200,000 million. And this is a phenomenon which is happening all around the world because today, people like ourselves own $36 trillion in companies all around the world, 80% of global GDP. So don't believe it when anyone tells you it is the wealthy elite and the few who own and control the companies of the world. No, we do. We are their owners. We are in charge. So here's what seems unusual about that. We vote consciously and we consume as conscious consumers. We vote with our values in our checkbooks every day, and yet we have all this money in these companies and we know they do stuff, but we don't seem to exercise our control. We don't seem to act like the bosses. We seem to act like we're victims of their actions, not the people who control their actions. Well, I know that's not true. And I know that's not true because I've seen us act like conscious consumers. I've seen us act massively effectively. And I saw it right here in New Zealand last year. When the media and the social media and interest groups became aware that KiwiSaver managers were invested in landmines, cluster munitions, nuclear weapons, and tobacco, they said, no, we don't want our money invested in those companies. There is no value alignment there. And that voice was so effective, so loud, that the KiwiSaver managers sold within 3 months all investments in these companies. Now you have to appreciate, folks, that getting the finance industry to act collectively and getting them to do anything within 3 months is Teutonic. And it was so effective that the two largest fund managers in the world, who collectively invest $13 trillion on behalf of their members, $13,000 billion, they launched products available to their global clients, which excluded these companies as well, because they heard the message. When people don't want these things in their investments, we'd better do something about it. So we in New Zealand made this happen. This is now the global benchmark for conscious investing and shareholder activism. We made it happen. Feel good? Yeah. It should. There's an amazing example of this happening on an international scale. Look at the tobacco industry. For decades and decades, tobacco shares were the darlings of the stock market. Huge sales, huge profits, huge dividends. Everyone was making a lot of money, and no one was paying particular attention to what they were doing. But 5 years ago, people like ourselves globally started telling our fund managers, our pension managers, our KiwiSaver managers, we don't want these companies. We don't want our money invested in what they do. They do not align with our values. And so what happened? They started selling them. And 5 years later, tobacco companies have gone from being a wonderful outperformer to a horrible investment by any standards. And the reason is that we are depriving them of their corporate lifeblood, shareholder capital. When we walk away, they die. And they are dying a slow and painful and horrible death. And you know there's a macabre justice in that, isn't there? Given how many deaths they caused. But we don't have to apply the stick. We don't have to sell out and walk away. Because when we do that, we go from being inside the boardroom as a shareholder with influence to outside on the pavement waving a placard. And the pressure groups and the interest groups have a valuable part to play, but together, when we act as a shareholder inside the boardroom, we can affect major change. And you know, if you're running a company now and you think about the next 20 or 30 or 40 years, there are some huge challenges. And if these companies are going to thrive, they are going to have to align with our values, because we're not only investors, we're consumers and we're citizens. And for companies to be relevant, they have to be relevant to our values. So think about the challenges. Diversity, something we're passionate about at Simplicity. If you are a government director in this country, you have a 47% chance of being a woman. And yet somehow only 17% of company directors are women. This is not a New Zealand problem, diversity, it's a New Zealand company problem. And if you think you're going to thrive as a company by not tapping the full pool of talent in New Zealand, you're kidding yourselves. Diversity is not a nice to have, it's a necessary for your very survival. And think about sustainability. Because for so long, if you were running a company anywhere in the world, your shareholders were saying, show me the money, pay me the money now, make profit short term. But think about ourselves as investors. We're going to be investing in these companies for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We need them to operate that way, operate sustainably, care about the future. So if we're in the boardroom saying we as a shareholder empower you to make less money now so that you can invest in your future, less money now so that you can harness your talent, create more jobs, create more value long term, be more sensible about the environment, isn't that a good thing to happen? Isn't that the New Zealand we all want to live in? And think about pay equity and pay fairness. Someone has to be sitting in the boardroom looking the CEO in the eye and saying, if you are paying yourself as if you are human capital, but you're paying your workers like they're a human expense, you've got to do something about that. Because what you pay yourself may be great for your wallet and your bonus and your share options, but it's not necessarily good for your employees, and it's certainly not good for shareholders. You know, there are people out there who think these things, sustainability, diversity, pay equity, are just crazy things. They're just things that you can't achieve. They're too hard to do. We haven't done it so far. The mountain is too high to climb. Well, I've got to tell you, folks, last year we climbed a pretty high mountain, and as far as I know it, Kiwis are bloody good at climbing mountains. We founded Simplicity as a non-profit KiwiSaver, which gives 15% of its fees to charity. We're a non-profit because we want our members to be as wealthy as they possibly can be when they retire, so they have the dignity and the choices that more money gives them. And we care about charity because we want to live in a charitable society. Because quite honestly, folks, when it comes to the finance industry and charity, somebody's got to lead from the front. But we passionately believe that the role of a KiwiSaver manager and the person who looks after your assets is to be a long-term stakeholder in businesses, to think about the future and invest for the future. Be a stakeholder, not a shareholder. Because it's a really beautiful story when it happens. A company that is invested in thinks sustainably. And because it does, the very best people want to work for it. And because they work for it, they produce the best goods and services. And people pay a premium for those goods and services because they like the quality of them and they like the values of the company. And so the company makes more money. And because it makes more money, it pays more taxes to fund the schools and hospitals. And it pays the shareholders, ourselves, KiwiSavers, more money. And then it can reinvest in its future again, reinvest in its people, create the new jobs. So ladies and gentlemen, when we go forward to the next election, be mindful that we have more than just one vote. We can vote for the government, and we should care about it because their decisions matter. But every day now, as conscious consumers, we can vote our values with our wallets and our purses. But perhaps we have now the most important vote of all, how our money is invested. Because when you vote for your KiwiSaver manager, when you vote for the person who manages your money, you are empowering them to speak with billions of dollars on behalf of millions of Kiwis, and their decisions will really, really matter. And if you don't like their values, if you don't know their values, if you don't understand what they're about, then hell, switch. It takes 2 minutes online these days. It's faster than voting. And so just like in 1602, when those ships sailed out into uncertain waters, we are sailing our ship of state into uncertain waters, the future. And we are all shareholders in this ship of state. And so as we do this, be mindful. Be mindful that bad things happen when good people do nothing, but be tremendously excited by the fact that wonderful things happen when good people care. Thank you.